when Zomato actually came for IPO, during that time as well, like many employees of Zomato, actually they become rich overnight. Freshworks, the same thing, very recently listed in Nasdaq. Overnight, approximately 100 150 plus employees have become richer overnight. Paytm, same story. Paytm is going to be listed in the next coming few months. Paytm and Oyo, already they have filed the returns for listing their companies on the stock exchange. So very soon we're going to expect their IPO. And once their IPO is announced, then obviously hundreds of employees from those companies are also going to become rich overnight. Zerodha, now and then we keep seeing the news articles about Zerodha, where they are purchasing the ESOP shares back from the employees. We will understand what is Zerodha's strategy, because Zerodha is not listing and Zerodha is not even raising the investment. So how does Zerodha organizing its ESOP, and how the employees of Zerodha are getting benefited, we will understand through this session. So these are the various famous companies which are like announcing the ESOP schemes, and their employees are getting benefited out of it very significantly. Of late, ESOP has become mandatory for startups to attract and retain the talent at the higher level, people from IITs, IIMs, and the very talented people. To reduce the attrition very significantly, having ESOP pool in the company has become very much mandatory. Now, I'll say you the primary reasons why people usually create ESOP pools. What are the primary reasons why people issue the stocks to the employees? How they will issue, how will it work? We will discuss in next 15 minutes of time. But however, I'm starting with why ESOPs are to be created by any company, or what benefits will it accrue either for organization, the company which is issuing ESOP, or for the employee, the person who is working for that organization. What will be the benefit for them? We'll understand in next 5 minutes. First, employee growth can be linked to the company's growth. For example, now let's say I'm an employee working for Vakil Search. If I receive the shares of Vakil Search as my compensation, the advantage for me is, as Vakil Search grows, my wealth also grows. So I'll be motivated to work for Vakil Search. Retention for longer time. Instead of giving the cash compensation, share is something which will motivate the employee to be with the company in the long term. So for that particular reason also, people use ESOP as a mechanism for retaining the high-level employees for a longer period of time. Third, it acts as a motivation because they are growing along with the company. Fourth, lower salary. I mean, what startups usually do is, for example, let's say when an employee is joining the startup, if his expectation is, let's say 30 lakhs per annum, what we do is we say him 20 lakhs per annum, we will give it in cash. 10 lakhs per annum, we will compensate you in the form of stocks. So that is how we will usually design the package structure. So in that way, both companies also getting benefited out of it. Employees also getting benefited out of it. Company is getting benefited because during the initial times, today we are startups, right? During that time, for us, paying the huge amount of cash is a problem. Even for employee, when he receives a stock, as and when the company grows, he will also benefit out of that stocks of the company. So that is the reason usually ESOPs are opted either by the organization or by the employee. This is a tool. People who cannot, employees are using it as a tool. People from IITs and IIMs, those people are willing to join any startup today only if that startup is providing ESOPs. And many people, they are leaving their large corporate careers and they are joining into the startups purely for taking up additional risk and growing significantly. Not a linear growth, for a leap bound growth. People are usually quitting the large organization and joining the small startups, especially for the benefit of ESOPs. Now we'll understand how does this ESOP life cycle work. So let's say, let's take our company as an example, Vakil Search. So I joined as an employee into Vakil Search. Now what Vakil Search does is, depending on the designation and depending on the role, Vakil Search will grant certain options to the employees. For example, inside Vakil Search, we are a team of 500 people. But for all 500 people, Vakil Search won't give employee stock options. What Vakil Search does is, it will identify top 10 people or 20 people or 30 people, depending on the size of the company. For them, whenever they are joining, during the joining moment or subsequently later as well, they will promise certain amount of shares as a part of their compensation. For example, let's say an employee is joining. I am joining Vakil Search, and let's say my package is 30 lakhs. During that point of time, what Vakil Search says is, out of this, apart from this 30 lakhs, we will pay you additional 10 lakhs. Or in this 30 lakhs, 10 lakhs of shares will be provided to you every year. So this is what is called as granting. Initially, a letter will be issued to the employee saying that, okay, this, you are eligible for 10 lakh rupees worth of shares. How did you arrive at the 10 lakh? How did you arrive at the number of shares? We will discuss in the subsequent slides, but this is how usually practically it works. Either at the time of joining or maybe after completing 1 or 2 years, if the company feels that I am a significant part of the company, my contribution will be very high to the company. During that point of time also, company in between, they can offer a letter, a grant letter is what people usually call a grant letter. That letter says, thank you for working with Vakil Search. And since you have contributed significantly for the growth of the company, you are eligible for this many number of shares at this particular price. And if you complete these terms and conditions, if you satisfy these terms and conditions, usually what will be the terms and conditions? For example, most of the times the terms and condition will be the number of years I need to complete employment with Vakil Search or any company. With this company, if I work for this much amount of period, then at that point of time, they will provide me compensation in terms of shares. So granting, as on the date of grant, employee doesn't receive anything. The employee will just receive a letter which says, if you satisfy these conditions, then you will be eligible for shares. And the period, the period, grant period, usually the period for satisfying the terms and conditions will be 2 years or 3 years. For example, today if I receive a letter, that letter says, if you work with Vakil Search for a continuous period of 2 years, then at the end of 2 years, you will be eligible for, let's say, 1,000 shares of Vakil Search. Now, what will happen is, during the grant time, employee will just receive a letter. And once I complete those terms and conditions, like let's say, once I complete the 2 years of time, which is said in the letter, then at that point of time, those shares will vest in my name. What do you mean by vesting? Those shares will I will have the right for purchasing those shares. Those shares will vest in the name of, we call it as vesting. It's a technical term or legal term. Vesting, those shares will vest in the name of Mr. Sriharsha. And if Mr. Sriharsha, if I wish to exercise, if I wish to really purchase those shares, then at that point of time, I can exercise those shares. Once I exercise those shares, what do I mean by it? I'll receive a share certificate from the company saying that you are eligible for these shares. See, there can be different scenarios. For example, at the time of joining Vakil Search, let's say Vakil Search share price, each share price of Vakil Search at the time of when I joined, let's say it was 50 rupees. 50 rupees was the share price. But they gave me a grant letter saying that you are eligible for purchasing 1,000 shares of Vakil Search at the end of 2 years, just for 10 rupees. Though today itself the share price is 50 rupees, I am eligible for purchasing the shares of Vakil Search for 10 rupees. This is the grant letter which I hold. Now, after 2 years, shares are vested in my name. If I need to exercise those shares, which means if I need to purchase those shares, as an employee, I need to pay the 10 rupees to the company. So I need to pay 10 rupees into 1,000 shares, which means 10,000 rupees I will pay to the company. Once I make the payment of 10,000, I will get the share certificate from the company saying that Mr. Sriharsha is holding 1,000 shares of Vakil Search and he has purchased it at 10 rupees per share. But each share value by that time, after 2 years, it can be significantly higher or it can be lower as well. For example, when I joined Vakil Search, let's say the share was at 10 rupees. 50 rupees. The original price was 50 rupees, but I have been given the share at 10 rupees itself because they need to motivate me for getting that share. So they have given me for 10 rupees itself. At the end of 2 years, now that 50 rupees share might have become 500, or that 50 rupees share might have become 5 rupees as well if the company has not performed well. Then employee will have an option. At the time of exercise, employee will have an option. Ideally, if the share price has significantly increased, I will exercise. Otherwise, employee says, no, I don't want to exercise. I want to let go of my options. I want to leave my options as it is. And once, let's say, the share price has increased. So as an employee, I exercised the shares. I paid the 10 rupees into 1,000 shares. And then I paid the 10,000, I got the share certificate. Now, I am the owner of the 1,000 shares. I can sell those shares to anybody. Whom will I sell? When will I sell? All these things I will explain. But I can sell those shares to anybody. But it doesn't mean that anybody. The reason being, there will be certain terms and conditions for sale as well. Because as per the grant letter, I would have been mentioned a certain terms and conditions saying that you cannot sell it to the competitor. You cannot sell it to the you cannot sell it to the third party without our approval. Some terms and conditions would have been there, but I can sell the shares on satisfying those terms and conditions. So this is what usually ESOP life cycle. First, at the time of joining, I'll get a grant. Next, over a period of 2 years or 3 years, whatever the terms and conditions mentioned in that grant letter, I will get that particular shares vested into my name. Thereafter, I can exercise them, and thereafter I can sell them. As an employee, I can sell them. Yeah. Now, there are questions. I mean, like there are two questions in the chat. One question is the grant required to be less than 50 or it can be more than 50? It is our option. We can keep it for more than 50 as well. See, at the time when I joined Vakil Search, let's say the share price was 50. Now, employee will be motivated only if you give the grant letter for either 50 or less than 50. But if you give the grant letter for 100 rupees, they will not be motivated enough to buy the share, right? I mean, they'll not be motivated enough. Next, what is the time period for exercising the shares? So let's say Vakil Search told me at the time of joining, 2 years you need to satisfy. I mean, 2 years you need to complete for vesting the shares you are in your name. So 2 years I completed. Now the shares got vested in my name. But within what time I need to exercise, which means as an employee, within what time I need to purchase, those terms and conditions should also be there in the grant letter itself. Most of the companies today, they allow employees to exercise at any point of time during their life. At any point of time during their life, they allow the employee to exercise them. The reason being, if they exercise, I mean, if we force the employees to exercise immediately, there will be a lot of tax implications. I'll explain you in the next slides. That is the reason most of the times they will usually leave it open and they'll say at any point of time in the life they can exercise, or they will keep the period very significantly higher. Within next 5 years of time they can exercise, or when the company reaches the valuation of 10,000 crores, till then they will be able to exercise. So something like that, broad conditions will be kept today for avoiding the tax implications immediately for the employees. And that is completely self-defined. I mean, company can define that particular exercise period as well. And thereafter, we can, once I get the shares in my name, I can sell it as per the conditions present in the grant letter. Now, how can I make money? I mean, as an employee, once I receive the shares, what are the different ways in which I can sell these shares? Subject to the grant letter, I can either sell it during the investment or acquisition. For example, in case of Flipkart, employees of Flipkart, they sold the shares to Walmart. They sold the shares along with the founders, along with other investors. Everybody, they sold the shares to Walmart and they made money. That is one methodology. Second, during the time of listing. For example, in case of Zomato, in case of Freshdesk, which we saw in the earlier slides, in those two cases, employees, they exercised the shares just before listing. And once the shares got listed in the stock exchange, most of them they sold completely. Some of them they sold partially. Some of them they sold, I mean, they have kept entire shares as it is with them. So during the time of listing, I mean, once the company gets listed, either during the listing or after listing, we can sell it in the stock market. Third, company itself can buy back the shares. What do I mean by it? For example, in case of Zerodha, what Zerodha is doing is, say I am an employee, let's say I am an employee of Zerodha. Zerodha gave me the share certificate, but the problem is Zerodha is not a listed company. Zerodha is not raising investment. And as per the grant letter, I cannot sell it to a third party. Then how will employee make money out of the share certificate? Employee can make money by selling it to Zerodha itself. Buyback of shares. Zerodha as a company will buy back the shares of employees and give cash to them. That is how Zerodha employees are making money. Then I can transfer the shares. For example, I can transfer the shares to the promoters, or I can transfer the shares to somebody else in accordance with the conditions as per the grant letter. So these are the ways in which the employee can transfer and make money. Okay. Before explaining the other aspects of ESOP, the practical implications which we need to consider, I'm just explaining you the process of establishing the ESOP inside a company. If you are running a startup and if you want to compensate your employees by giving them the ESOP shares, then this is the methodology which you need to follow, or these are the compliances which we need to follow. First is, we need to create a pool of shares. What do you mean by pool of shares? So let's say me and my friend, together we started a company where I am holding 50% of shares. He is holding 50% of shares. We have some 20-30 employees in our company. If we are deciding to give them employee stock option plan, then we need to create some additional shares in the company. Additional shares, and then park it as ESOP pool. We need to create some additional shares and keep it as ESOP pool. Out of those additional shares only, I can give the shares to the employees and all. So we need to, first step is creating those additional shares. Once I create that additional shares, what will happen is my percentage in the company will reduce. For example, earlier I used to hold 5,000 shares, my friend used to hold 5,000 shares, so 50%, 50%. Now once I create, let's say, additional 50,000 shares, I created ESOP for additional 50,000, then the total shares in the company is 1,50,000, of which I am holding 33%, my friend is holding 33%, all the employees put together, they are holding 33%. So that is how 100% of the shares will come. So first step is creating pool. Second step is creating a policy on how to allocate the shares from that pool, because it is not that just creating the pool, we need to also define a policy. For senior employees, how many shares will be allocated? For junior employees, how many shares will be allocated? So all that needs to be, and what should be the grant period? What should be the vesting period? What shall be the exercise terms and conditions? Such a policy has to be drafted. After drafting the policy, a valuation report needs to be obtained today from a chartered accountant, from a registered chartered accountant. We need to obtain a valuation report. Then fourth one is this policy and valuation report, we need to file it with MCA. Okay, then this step is completed, right? We created a policy, we created a pool. Once this is done, then for out of my 30 employees in the company, I don't wish to give ESOP to 30 employees. For example, let's say I want to give out of the 30 for 5 employees. For those 5 employees alone, I'll give the grant letters. Whether should I give it immediately on creation of pool? Not required. You can give it at any point of time, as long as that pool is not empty. I mean, like we created pool with 50,000 shares, right? For those 50,000 shares, I can give this share certificates, grant letters at any point of time. I need not give it immediately. I can give it subsequently, depending on their performance or depending on any other basis. I can give that particular grant letters. From the date of giving the grant letter, they have to satisfy the conditions mentioned in that grant letter, like continuous employment of 2 years or increasing the revenue to 30% more or 40% more. Whatever might be the terms and conditions, we can keep in the grant letter, but the grant letter will be issued to the employees. So this is the initial process. A pool has to be created, a policy has to be created, valuation report has to be done, and this has to be filed with MCA. For whomever employees we are planning to issue the ESOPs, we need to issue them the grant letter. Then thereafter, after the completion of the 2 years period, I mean, once the excise period is completed, I mean, once the vesting period is completed, whatever the terms and conditions we said in the grant letter are satisfied, then at the time, employee will be eligible for exercising the share. At the time of exercise, usually exercising will come into picture because of the taxation reasons. We usually suggest to the employees to exercise only at the time of investment round, next investment round, or only when the company goes for listing, or only when the company is planning to buy back the shares. Usually before these circumstances, we will ask the employees to exercise them. Once they exercise the shares, during that time also we need to prepare a valuation report, but this time with the help of a merchant banker. We need to prepare with the help of a merchant banker. Second, we need to deduct the tax from the employee. What is the amount of tax? For example, in my case, let's say I received the share for 10 rupees, right? But let's say at the time of exercise, each share of Vakil Search is valued for 100 rupees. So I need to pay tax on 90 rupees. I need to pay tax on 90 rupees at the time of exercise itself. Though I may not sell this share to anybody, I may not make money now, but at the time of exercise itself, I need to pay that particular tax amount. That is the reason most of the times people will exercise only when they have option to sell. If they don't have option to sell, they won't exercise at all. That share will lie in their name itself. So I'll exercise, and then share certificate will be, once I exercise, a tax will be deducted and share certificate will be given by Vakil Search to my name. In my name, I'll obtain a share certificate. Thereafter, I can go and sell this particular share certificate to anybody depending on the terms and conditions as per the grant letter. So this is how at the time of exercise conditions will be there. But usually as a startup, we need to worry only at the time of issuing the grant. During the issue of grant, that is the time when compliances will be there. Because at the time of exercise, anyway, company will have a lot of money. These compliances will not be mattering a lot at the point of time. Certain things need to be considered. After this, I'll leave you the forum for questions. When you are planning the ESOP pool, certain things have to be remembered in your company. Number one, types of vesting and types of exercise. See, when I joined Vakil Search, like for example, one option for Vakil Search is they can say you are eligible for 1,000 shares at the end of 3 years. Once you complete 3 years of time, 1,000 shares are eligible for you. Or they can also define in such a way. You are eligible for 1,000 shares, but 25% will vest in the first year, 25% will vest in the second year, 25% will vest in the third year, 25% will vest in the fourth year. So instead of asking the employee to wait till the end of 3 years or 4 years with a zero vesting, what we can say them is, we can say them a step-by-step vesting, saying that in the first 1 year itself, you'll be eligible for 250 shares. Second year, you'll be eligible for another 250 shares. Third year, another 250. Fourth year, another 250. This motivates the employee a little bit more when compared to keeping him with zero shares for 4 years. Even exercise also, we can keep a condition to the employee saying that you have to exercise immediately, or we can keep a condition saying that you can exercise in any time in the next 4 years, or any time before you leave the company, or any time even if you leave the company as well. Giving the flexible exercise option will help the employee to plan the tax as well. The reason, that is my second point actually here. The reason being, when the employee exercises the shares, ideally he is just receiving a share certificate, but he will end up paying a huge tax. So for that particular reason, we should allow the employee with the flexibility to exercise it at any point of time. So that what employees will do, all Voyo, Ola, Zomato, Paytm, all these guys, I mean, people whoever became rich now, they are not current employees of Flipkart, or they are not current employees of Ola, or they are not current employees of Voyo. They were all ex-employees. Just the shares have been vested into their names. Now they are exercising those shares because they have an opportunity to sell in the market. So that way we should also like give them flexibility so that tax implication will not be there immediately. And how many number of shares should be created in the ESOP pool? That is very important thing. The reason is, let's say in my example, I told I'll create 50,000 shares for ESOP pool, right? It is not such an easy decision. The reason is, if I create 50,000, immediately as a promoter, my share came down to 33% and my friend's share came down to 33%. So I should consider the dilution. How many employees are there? How many senior employees are there? What is my next 5-year journey in the company? So we need to consider all of that and then create pool. Usually, most of the companies create pool for either 10% of the shares or 25% of the shares. So 10% or 15%, I'm sorry. 10% to 15% of the shares will be allocated for ESOP pool in most of the cases. And one other methodology is, usually, see for example, when Vakil Satya says, I'll give you 1,000 shares, 1,000 is a small number, so I may not be motivated. Just to motivate the employees, what people do is, just before going for ESOP, they will split each share into 10 shares. Instead of 10 rupees face value shares, they'll split it into 1 rupee face value. Then for an employee, if you are planning to give 10 shares, or you can give 100 shares, though the value of share is same, but you can give 100, which will look like a bigger number, and the employee will be motivated over there. And instead of following, the other option which you have is, instead of following this entire process of policy and all these things, if you are a very initial startup, just now started and all, then you can directly allocate the shares as well. I mean, this is only for very new startups, where instead of this granting period, vesting period, policy, all these documents, if you think that one of your employees is a very significant contributor, allocate the share to them today itself at face value, 10 rupees each, because today's your share value will be 10 rupees only, because you are a very new company. Allocate the share today itself, you can avoid this process. But however, this is only for very new companies. Don't give any verbal promises with respect to shares. That is very, very dangerous. Most of the bigger companies have done these mistakes. Don't give any verbal promises. Any promise which you are giving in terms of share compensation, saying that I'll give you 1% of the company, 2% of the company. Don't talk in terms of percentages. Don't talk in terms of verbal commitments. Always have a written paper. Always get proper professional advice before promising any shares to the employees. The reason being, the moment company becomes big, all these things will create a huge amount of problem for the company. So that is the reason, don't give any verbal promises. Don't give promises in terms of percentages. Always follow the formal approach of grant letter. Only the grant letter should speak to the employee, but not any verbal promises. So these are certain practical aspects which we need to consider while issuing ESOPs. As such, ESOP is a complicated process, but now that we are receiving so many inquiries for creation of ESOP, especially after this news articles and all saying that these many employees became richer, many employees have started asking for ESOPs with the companies. To accommodate small companies also to create ESOP pool, we came up with this 24,999 package. Usually ESOP packages at Vakil Search will start with a minimum of 50,000 to 60,000 rupees value. The reason is, this is the amount of work which is involved. Preparation of ESOP policy, creation of pool, valuation report, MCA filing, drafting employee agreements. These are all the different packages, different services which have to be done as a part of ESOP. Usually we do it at a minimum of 1 lakh rupees. but 60,000 to 1 lakh used to be a minimum price for creating ESOP. But we have reduced it with the condition that we will follow a standard approach, a very standard, whatever is suitable for most of the startups. With very minimum changes, we can provide you those templates, and we will enable you to file them and create the pool. So that for that particular thing, we are charging a very minimum of 24,999, and this is not a long-standing offer. This is an offer which will be valid only till 10th of October. The reason most of the inquiries are coming now because of a lot of hype in the market regarding ESOP. So for that particular reason, we are giving this offer only till 10th of October. And if anybody is interested, you can email us at webinars@vakilsearch.com, and we will be helping you in creating this. But if your company is at already a decent scale or a decent size, then at that point of time, you can come, you can sign up for customized ESOP package, which will not be at this 24,999, because a professional lawyer and a company secretary and a chartered accountant will sit with you to plan the pool which needs to be created, to whom how many shares need to be allocated, what kind of designations, what kind of shares will motivate. All these things we will sit and plan together. During that time, it will be at a very higher price. But for a basic plan, for enabling all startups to consider this ESOP as a compensation mechanism, we are starting it at 24,999 itself. If anybody is interested, you can email at this webinars@vakilsearch.com. We'll be more than happy to help you. And just before winding up, one point which I wanted to say is Oyo's ESOP pool has been created by VakilSearch. We are very happy that Oyo is coming for listing. In next 3 to 4 months, Oyo is going for listing, and many employees of Oyo are going to become rich overnight. And we were the people. VakilSearch is the company which drafted the ESOP policy for Oyo, and we are very proud of it. We are very happy for the employees of Oyo as well. So if you have any doubts, I'll wait for 10 or 15 minutes more. Otherwise, we can stop the session. Okay, let me take up the doubts. If all 33% shares are used among, let's say, 30 employees, and if now we want to give option to new employees, 31 onwards, so do we need to increase the pool, or the existing 33% share will get? Yeah, we need to increase the pool further. For example, now let's say we created 50,000 shares and we consumed all the 50,000 shares. Then we can create additional pool with additional 20,000 or additional 30,000 shares. Then again, percentages will reduce. For example, let's say I created additionally for another 50,000, which means as a promoter, my share will come down to 25. My friend's share, another promoter, he will come down to 25. All the 30 employees to whom I allocated the shares, they will be holding put together 25. New employees who are going to come, they will be holding 25. So as and when we create the pool, the dilution will happen and we will keep coming down. And this dilution percentages also we can strategically manage in such a way that promoters' dilution is not being too much by creating a small pool in the initial days. This pool that is created for ESOP is held by a trust until they are granted. Know that the formation of trust and all these things are not even mandatory even for listed companies as well. Usually certain companies do it. What they'll do is, once I create a ESOP pool, 33% shares with me, 33% shares with my friend. The 33% shares, whichever we created for ESOP purpose, they initially assign it to a trust. From that trust, they will transfer it to the employees and all. But that is not mandatory. Usually bigger companies, they do it for operational convenience and all. For a small startup, it is not mandatory to create a trust, and from the trust they need to allocate the shares. No, it is not required. Those shares will be lying with the company itself. And those shares, if they are not exercised, then they will be waived off, or those shares will be zeroed out. Those shares will not be present if nobody is exercising the shares. Or let's say out of the 50,000 shares, 20,000 shares got exercised. 30,000 shares, if they are not exercised, they'll just be lying as it is in the company. They'll become zeroed out. It will not be held in anybody's name. They'll just be zeroed out. So no need to formulate any trust and all. It is not mandatory. Can we dilute ESOP pool of 33% for new employees without needing to create a new pool? Yeah, as long as those shares are there with us, the 50,000 shares which we created, within those shares you can keep issuing to the employees. But more than 50,000 shares, if you are planning to allocate, then it is not possible. You need to definitely dilute your employees for sure. Employee has to pay the tax at the time of exercise, only at the time of exercise. That's mandatory, only at the time of exercise. That is the reason the exercising should be done strategically. Okay, like you have a question on bringing in investors. Yeah, we can take questions on that. But ideally, I would suggest you can drop your question on the email webinars@vakilsearch.com. so that if the question is not relating to the topic, we can address you there on the email itself. When is it better to create ESOP pool? Either at the time of, before taking the investor or after taking the investor. It all depends on how cooperative your investor is. Today, any logical investor will understand the need for creating ESOP. So if a professional investor is stepping in, then it is better to create ESOP pool after investor steps in, so that investor will also get diluted along with us. Not just a promoter, even investor will get diluted. So if a professional investor is coming in, then at that point of time, it is better to create ESOP after investor stepping in and having the discussion in the initial stages itself. When we are negotiating for the investment, at the time itself, we can clearly mention them. We will be planning to create an ESOP pool. We have to clearly mention that as well. So yeah, this is great. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. And if you have any questions, you can actually reach out to us at this particular mail ID, webinars@vakilsearch.com. We'll be more than happy to help you over there. Thank you. Thank you very much.